chat. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Nicole Gillen, and I want to welcome everyone to another episode of a 30-minute memoir. Today's guest that I have with me, I'm very excited, is Jerri Clark, and she has just some wonderful things to talk about today, which is really unusual. It's not something we normally talk about, but I think it's something that is so worth addressing when we're talking about this space and we're talking about the challenges that we all face, whether you're someone with the illness, a serious mental illness, or you're a caregiver. So to take a step back, I'm Nicole. I'm a former IT executive, and I decided to write a book. And this was to really help anyone in this complicated space of schizophrenia and serious mental illness. I have a daughter who struggles with the illness, which is how I came to understand this world. And what I decided is that I just found book after book and conversation after conversation, which were all valuable, but didn't give a voice to the people who are in it, whether it's the person with the illness or the caregiver. And so I started this really to try and do that. So, what I try to accomplish in these literally 30-minute sessions, shed some light on challenges, but also show how resilient the community is, show some victories and moments of success, and then, focus on one area in each memoir of a situation or an area of understanding or expertise or whatever it might be, so we can all take away some information that makes us a little bit wiser in the process. So let me go ahead and quickly share my screen. Hopefully that is now showing. So as I mentioned, there we go. So our guest today is Jerri Clark. She's a writer, she's a grandma, and she's a mental health advocate. Jerri's going to talk to us extensively today about the concept of ambiguous loss. And she has a number of resources that she has helped to author, right? She's got a video, Gone But Not Gone. She's written a number of articles about her son's story, which she'll talk about shortly. And she plays a role at the Treatment Advocacy Center as an advocate based on DJ Jaffe's work. And she's also a family resource and advocacy manager. So she's got her hands in a lot of pots. So with that as a quick overview, Jerri, I'm going to turn it over to you to give a little bit about your story, and then we'll go into the ambiguous loss points.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm really honored to be here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of this information about ambiguous loss. So a little bit more about me. I went to journalism school. So I was a magazine writer until I started a family, and I took a break from that work and taught yoga and dance for a little over 20 years while I was raising my kids. My son was an honor student. He was a student athlete. Our whole family loves to surf together. We grew up camping and skiing and doing all of those things. I was basically a soccer mom who taught yoga and dance. And my honor student son went off to college, and in the middle of his freshman year called with very alarming concerns that didn't really make sense, and that ended up being his first psychotic break. I had no knowledge of the mental health system at that time. I had no idea what we were in for, and I feel like I lost my son on so many levels across time. I lost him at age 19 to a psychotic illness that changed him forever. And then I started to realize that I was losing him to a very disjointed, dysfunctional mental health system that isn't even a system. And I learned about the criminal legal system in an extremely challenging way as a mom trying to navigate getting help for my son and having him punished instead. So I lost him to this dysfunctional system, and in the process of losing him to a broken system, I decided that I was poised to impact this broken world and became an advocate. So I started my own little grassroots organization in Washington State called Mothers of the Mentally Ill while my son was still living. When he was 23, about 4 years into his psychotic illness, my son took his own life. And I have continued this advocacy work in his honor. So
It's
I
just,
lost him to the illness, I lost him to the system, and I lost him to death. So those are 3 levels of loss that all fit within the category of ambiguous loss, which we'll get into in a moment. Thanks, Nicole.
yeah, what's interesting is the categories that you just mentioned. It's not something I thought about that specifically, but as you said them, I'm thinking about my own daughter, and it's the loss of who she was planning on being. It's the loss of the things that she loved to do. It's the loss of the friendships that have gone away. There's just so many categories of loss, and I think that's where it starts to become so overwhelming, particularly as a caregiver, and trying to, it's sand through your fingers, and you can't get it back in it,
That's right.
and it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's sand through your fingers, you can't get that back. I think that's really well said. A and I will offer that it's helpful that it has a name, and being able to give the name ambiguous loss to these experiences can give us permission to grieve. Because when we acknowledge that these are losses, and these are losses that are like losses related to other severe chronic illnesses and death, it helps us understand why we feel so much grief. The grief is as profound as the grief of losing a child to death, even if your loved one with severe mental illness is still living. And that's where the phrase gone but not gone applies primarily. There are other applications to that phrase, but that's the primary use of that phrase in this space. Someone who is so psychologically different, so psychiatrically deteriorated that they are not who they were. They are not the person who had plans, goals that you remember. They have new plans and goals, perhaps, but they're completely changed. So that person that you knew before is effectively gone, and the person who's here now is not gone. So that incongruity is part of the ambiguity that we can start to recognize. But just being able to say, I am experiencing an ambiguous loss, so of course I am grieving, is a place to begin in terms of coping.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking to myself, I mean, I have felt this every day for the past 4.5 years, and in different ways, and it's like a death of 1,000 cuts.
Yeah,
No sooner do you start to feel like, okay, I can help her. It's going to be okay. I feel like, and then all of a sudden you realize there's something else that's been lost. There's just yet another thing, and it just doesn't stop. Like, it's like the hits keep coming in terms of this ongoing loss, and as she tries, as she is absolutely giving her best, is still not who she would have been in the past, and in her past ability to give her best. And so even watching her today, I'm like, oh, this is not the person pre-disease who's, when she set her mind to something, she was going to go do it. And now it's I can't even call it baby steps. It's like not even inches. It's these little teeny tiny moments where you're hoping for a step forward before you take 2 steps back. And it's ever present, I think.
yeah, that's right. So the term ambiguous loss was coined by a family therapist and a professor of family social science, Dr. Pauline Boss. I actually attended and became certified through her online course offered through the University of Minnesota to gain the knowledge that I'm sharing through the work that I'm doing on ambiguous loss. And I reached out to Dr. Boss because I was wondering if she had any specific information about ambiguous loss as it relates to severe mental illness. And she does have a few sections in her books. She has multiple books out there on the topic, and she's easy to look up online if you're interested in reading her books, which I highly recommend. And she reached back to me with a few kind of nuggets on the topic and then said, I presume you're asking because you want to teach on the topic or do trainings on the topic. And so that planted a seed because no, I really was thinking I was just going to write a quick article for TAC's website and share out this information. I had started sharing the term ambiguous loss on Facebook through a number of family support groups where people kept expressing how they felt grief as though their loved one had died and they didn't know what to do with that grief. It was so complicated and confusing. And so I was posting into some of those groups. There's a name for it. It's called ambiguous loss. So the grief that you're experiencing is very challenging. Ambiguous losses are some of the most difficult losses because they lack clarity. They lack any opportunity for resolution because you cannot fix the ambiguity. The ambiguity is ever present, right? At any rate, I responded to Dr. Boss and said, I'm interested. And so she told me about her online course, which I did then complete last summer. Um, so these 6 coping strategies are hers. And I am working with these coping strategies in small groups that I'm offering seminars for online. And anyone who wants to get on my interest list to potentially go through one of those seminars just needs to send me an email. My email's on the previous slide, and I know Nicole's sharing it out with these materials. But I'd love to go over what these coping strategies are because it's super interesting, Nicole, that in the way that you were sort of thinking about this topic in the context of your own family situation, I heard you touch on several of these
Hmm.
already. I think they're quite intuitive, actually, but giving them vocabulary can help us be more intentional about how we think about these losses. We gave them numbers 1 through 6 because it helps our brains remember material, but I want you to know these are not linear. It's not like step 1, check, got it. Step 2, check, got it. No, these are not linear. They're fluid and they're a forever practice. You don't accomplish these steps. These are strategies that you live with, you work with, because what we're dealing with has so much ambiguity. It's not going to have closure. One of Dr. Boss's books is called The Myth of Closure. There is no such thing as closure. So the lack of clarity, the lack of resolution, the ambiguity is ongoing. Therefore, the coping strategies for living with that ambiguity and those ambiguous losses is also ongoing, but we can get better at it with practice. So, the first coping strategy is to find meaning. And the questions that you would want to ask yourself are, what have I lost? And what do those losses mean to me? So, this gives us a tool for acknowledging that what we are experiencing is loss and it has had an effect. Part of that effect is going to be grief. So, giving ourselves permission to grieve is part of that meaning that we can start to discover. There's going to be more there too, and it's going to be very individual. Go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I feel like the grieving just doesn't go away though. And
Right,
it's because your loved one is right there. And
right.
so putting it behind you is almost impossible.
It is impossible. And so that segues beautifully into what we've numbered here as number 2, to adjust mastery. So you're never going to put the grief behind you. So mastery is wanting to, and you're a very accomplished person, Nicole, who goes after something and gets it done. So you're going to struggle with mastery as much as anyone.
Yeah.
Right? So that desire to get through the grief and put it in the rearview mirror is a desire for mastery. So when we learn to adjust mastery, or we start practicing how to adjust mastery, we recognize what cannot change is not something we can master. We cannot master ambiguity because we'll never be able to fix it, no matter how hard we try, right? So these illnesses are not fixable. They can improve. Our circumstances, our relationships, the symptoms, all of that can be addressed and things can improve. But ultimately, we cannot change what we have lost. Okay. So recognizing that we can't master the situation, and we also can't master our emotions related to the situation. We just need to learn to work with them. Grief is here. So part of adjusting mastery is learning a both and perspective. So when we stop trying to master grief, we can recognize that we can experience both grief and joy, love, hope, curiosity, all of the other things that are still available in our life don't get put on hold because of grief. We
But
don't have to master grief to have those other experiences too.
I think one of the reasons why that's so hard, and I don't know if it's just Western society, but we are taught you're like in a grieving state. And then when you're done with that, you can come on back to joy. You can come on back to these, happiness and all these other things once you move through grief. But
Yeah,
this grief doesn't go away. So
correct.
this whole new skill of being able to grieve and understand the loss while also trying to experience joy and positive emotions in tandem is a whole new skill, I think, for everybody.
Both and. It's taking a both and perspective. And you're right that there are aspects of our culture, maybe overtly or just by association, we've learned what you just said, that if you're in grief or that somebody in your family is in a terrible situation, everything pauses in order to get through that and shut the door on it. And that's the
Yeah.
myth of closure. That's the myth of closure, right? So we're not going to get over our grief. But I like to think of it this way. If you've ever dropped like a drop of food coloring in a very small dish, the color is really intense. If you expand the dish and you drop the food coloring in, the color is dissipated. Grief across time can be a little bit like that, right? So grief is still there. I still see its color, and I've got a bigger container. And I have room for joy, hope, and other experiences that can coexist with how grief has colored my life. The third coping strategy is to reconstruct identity. I talked earlier about how I kind of came up as a soccer mom, right? So my son was accomplished. I was very proud of him. And I had a lot of identity wrapped up in being his mom. And I had to think of myself in a whole new way when this illness
Oops.
roared into our family and changed everything. So finding new purpose, finding new places to belong, finding new friendships, new vocations. I got into this advocacy work directly because of the experiences that I was having. So, how you re-envision yourself is a huge part. So, Nicole, you just went off the slide.
Uh-oh, what happened there?
I don't know.
Uh-oh, I've seen I've lost everything. There we
That's
go.
all right. There we go.
There we go.
So
Zoom decided to
reconstruct
alert me that it wanted me to do something. I was like,
it
well,
was,
oh,
yeah,
better do it now.
no worries. So
Sorry.
reconstructing identity is the third. Again, these aren't linear, but we put them on this list to help with memory. The fourth coping strategy listed here is about revising attachment. And the phrase that I love from this one, that is Dr. Boss's phrase, is learning to let go while remembering. So we talked about gone but not gone. Another way to think about gone but not gone is that who the person was, or maybe such as my situation with a suicide loss, they really are physically gone, but they're still present in our hearts and memories. So even though your daughter is still with you, Nicole, there is a previous version of your daughter who is still present in your heart and memories that you can keep alive in your heart and memories. So that's another way to let go while remembering. So you're letting go of attachment to needing her to be who everybody thought she was becoming. At the same time, you're keeping alive the memory of that person in your heart, right? So you're letting go of needing that to be like it was, because you can't master that,
Yeah.
but you're still remembering. So that's part of revising attachment. There's a lot there, but that's a piece of it. Normalizing ambivalence means to expect and accept that we will have conflicting emotions.
Mhm.
And a really heavy, well, I'll give you a light one first. So a light one is, let's say I'm snow skiing and I'm in my cozy coat. So a big part of me is warm and part of me is cold. So I have cold parts and warm parts at the same time. That's a really simple version. Here's a hard one in the SMI space. I can experience deep grief that my son has passed, and also relief that he's no longer in pain and we're no longer in the middle of this struggle. If your loved one with severe mental illness is still living, but the situation is dire, worse than yours, Nicole, maybe your loved one is homeless, dangerously psychotic, incarcerated, they might be missing. There could be a sense of emotion in your being that you kind of wish that you had the closure of their death, because you would know what to do with that. At the
Yeah.
same time, you're glad they're still living. And you, of course, want them to survive and return to a life that would be more hopeful, right? So, normalizing ambivalence is recognizing that as a human being, of course, I'm having these mixed emotions. Who wouldn't be?
I
Who
know, but
wouldn't?
as a parent, it just feels awful
Yeah,
to potentially have those conflicting emotions,
right.
right? I mean,
That's right.
like it's just that's not part of the package. This is a whole new
Right.
part of particularly parenting.
That's right.
And that is just an awful emotion to have.
And there's guilt. We have so
Yeah.
much guilt. And that's why the strategy is to normalize that ambivalence. The
Yeah.
strategy is to recognize that what we're experiencing is complex and normal under the circumstances. So by normalizing it, we can dissipate that guilt, we can dissipate that confusion. We're not going to act on those kinds of emotions related to, if they just died, it'd be easier. So it would be abusive to say something horrible like, you know, go ahead and just disappear because it would be easier on everyone. That would be abusive. That would be a horrible thing to say. So we're not doing that. That is when those emotions get so bottled up that they come spewing out in inappropriate ways. So the point of normalizing the ambivalence is to acknowledge the emotions that we're feeling as expected and real, and to work with the emotions so that we don't have outbursts that are unhelpful or even abusive, right?
Yeah.
So we can get over the guilt about what we feel, but not take actions that would be inappropriate.
Mm-hmm.
So the final coping strategy listed is to discover new hope. I heard you talk about this when you were talking earlier about your daughter Nicole, how you kept holding on to that hope that you'd get back to the daughter that you knew. Those are old hopes. Recognizing that we can't master that, we're not going to go back, we can't turn the clock back. But we can discover new hope about what's possible now. When we become tolerant of ambiguity, we enable new possibilities, and new hope becomes accessible to us because we're no longer stuck in needing the old hopes to manifest. So this is active. Discovering new hope requires us to be actively pursuing new possibilities. It's not passive. Old hope tends to be very passive. I don't know. I can't make anything change, but I just keep hoping
Yeah.
that we'll go back to the way we used to be. That can make us really stuck and frozen in our grief experience instead of moving on.
Well, and I think also it's easy to put like a shiny coat on that past hope, right? That past hope was just spectacular. There were so many amazing things about that past hope. And the present hope is a fraction of what past hopes were. So it's a lot harder to get as excited about the present hope considering the past hope glossiness in
Yeah.
our heads. I don't know. I'm not saying it right, but that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we don't tolerate ambiguity, we can get stuck in just polishing and polishing and polishing that old hope. And then we get stuck because we don't move on. We don't learn both and.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll tell you what, it's just I think one of the pieces of this is it's being comfortable and living in this big gray zone
Yeah.
of not knowing where you are, not knowing where you're headed, not knowing, it's just and yet saying that's okay. I can live in this complete ambiguity on so many levels, right? I don't know why
Yeah.
my background keeps making me disappear, but like all this, there's degrees of ambiguity in this present tense
That's
that you
right.
have to get comfortable with, which is so hard because you want to know that you can put them on a path and they can go. But the path changes daily and there's just so many factors and it's an enormously difficult proposition. And it's not just for the caregiver. I would imagine, although my daughter doesn't say it, for the person with the illness, there has to be as much loss and
Absolutely. Absolutely.
challenges, you
Yeah,
know?
experiencing a severe mental illness includes so many layers of ambiguity and so many losses. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
tolerating the ambiguity in order to discover new hope and learn to live in the gray space. We want to be black and white thinkers, especially people who want to be masters of everything,
Yep.
very black and white. We want open doors and closed doors, right? And instead, it's this ambiguous space where there's a lot that's unknown.
I have one final question on this subject, and it's not something that we've really talked about, but I'm wondering, is there any role the mental health care professionals play in this?
Yeah, and Dr. Boss's books are really addressed to clinicians. So her hope has been all along that more clinicians understand ambiguous loss when they're working with clients who are experiencing losses that are ambiguous. So yeah, I would think any professional working with an individual and ideally a whole family and their family dynamic could begin to recognize ambiguous loss and could use these coping strategies therapeutically. When I'm teaching this topic, I am not a trained therapist, so I'm not using this as an intervention. I'm providing this as information and a resource for people who want to do self-directed work on their own. But a clinician who does have all of those credentials could absolutely go into ambiguous loss as a therapeutic approach. And I think
So,
it could be very helpful.
it's an interesting sort of takeaway for anyone who's a caregiver is to take these concepts, if they have their own therapist, and I hope they do, to take it to them, to talk to them specifically about this as a strategy for helping them process what's happening on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah, Dr. Boss talks about ambiguous loss as a relational health issue.
Hmm.
So you can do self work in terms of these coping strategies, but a lot of it really has to do with how you relate to others in your family, in your community. So it's helpful if people within your relationships, within your family and community, are also learning these concepts alongside you so that everyone kind of understands, wow, we're in an ambiguous space together. There's grief here visiting, and we can help one another through this.
So I know we're getting at the end of time here. One of the things I love to do is always end this with a positive statement. And so I'll go first and I'll just say what I love about, well, I'm not gonna say what I love about this, but what I love about this is it's tools, it's things that I can walk away with and use. It's things that I can be proactive with. It's things that put a name on it that give me action items. And as a human being who's can be a big control freak, I love the opportunity to apply new techniques to my situation to help me and my daughter. So I thank you so much for this because this is not something that I've really specifically had previously, and I'm excited for it. So thank you. Anything on your end?
So much room for new hope. And within the coping strategy of Discover New Hope, Dr. Boss encourages people to play with ambiguity. I mentioned earlier that my family surfs and I'm on the Oregon coast right now. And my favorite way to play with ambiguity is to paddle out because I never know what
Mhm.
kind of waves I'm going to get, what kind of rides I'm going to get. And so that's a beautiful way to just live in this ambiguous space of I'm just going to give it a go. I'm just going to paddle out and see what happens.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story and everything around ambiguous loss. Um, you are one of those people, Jerri, that is a true light in this complicated, difficult space of serious mental illness. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. I'll put all of her links in the notes when I post it, as well as links about me and my stuff, but that's not relevant right now. So, Jerri, thank you so much. And I will hopefully see you soon.
Thank you so much, Nicole.
Okay.